restrictions on regarding the COVID virus. So with that said, Brad, we're ready to take.
This is Julie Cagliastro, Director of IT. We have no public comment at this time.
All right.
Okay,
And then
Chair Long, can I go ahead and just morning, everybody? So PSTA has developed several methods of ensuring the ability of the public to comment during these virtual meetings. The main option right now during the meeting, the public can provide public comment via telephone by calling 1-408-418-9388 and follow the prompts. The meeting ID is 716. That's 716-809-078, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Again, the telephone number is 1-408-418-9388, and the meeting ID is 716-809-078. I think this number is also published on our website by the link that you can call in as well. When it comes time for you to, if you call in, when it comes time for you to make a public comment, the chair will call on you. So that's all we had to say. So, Commissioner Long, back to you.
thank you very much, Brad. And now we have an action item to approve the minutes of February 5th. If I could have a motion, please, and then we'll need a second.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Second by Commissioner Justice. Commissioner Justice, you may want to unmute yourself so you can speak if you want. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Please raise your hand and say aye. Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. And information items, Harry, do you want to give the report?
Around the country that are ready to go, move them along a little faster to try and take advantage of money that's already been appropriated to get some projects like the Central Avenue BRT project off the line. We've heard from Congressman Diaz-Balart's office that he was going to contact the Department of Transportation, and his staff said he did follow up and that they got a report back that as far as FTA is concerned, everything that you all need to do on the project is done. All the paperwork's in, they're reviewing it, and they hope to, they say, have a final decision mid-year. So we're closing in on mid-year, but we will continue to push as much as we can. On the other issue that to talk about is future funding for, that I want to talk about is that the Congress is in the midst of working on its regular appropriations process. Even though they're still have not reconvened, they're not scheduled to reconvene now until next Tuesday. The committee staff is working through the process, and they're hoping to get some bills to the Appropriations Committee by June. So the goal is to get as many appropriations bills done on time so there won't be a lag before the fiscal year begins on October 1st. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Steve Palmer, to talk about the authorization process and about the coronavirus relief funds. Steve, are you still there?
Julie, I think he's an attendee now, Julie.
Steve, he says he's muted, so Steve, you have to unmute.
Steve Palmer had to call in because he.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There you are.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, and thanks, Julie. Harry, thank you for that. Yeah, I apologize. My Wi-Fi is not working too well today, so I'm calling in old-fashioned style. So we know that there's going to be interest in trying to do additional funding under CARES Act 2.0 or 4.0, whatever you want to call it. The question is, will there be and when will it be? As you've seen the battle lines being drawn, Pelosi has called for upwards of $1 trillion for state and local governments, and Senate Majority Leader Senator Mitch McConnell has said, not so fast, we're going to put a pause on the bill, any legislation right now. And as you saw him say at one point, as far as if states and counties had to go bankrupt, that was okay with him. I think he's come around, but it's a question of how high the price will be before there's additional legislation that the House Democrats will want to accept. In terms of transit funding, the APTA is developing another proposal for additional funding. It's not at all clear to me that they will, if there is not a big infrastructure bill this year, that additional funding will make it into the legislation this year, because as I just referred to, the Senate Republicans and the president are probably going to stop, at least the Senate Republicans are going to hit a pause button when it comes to additional legislation, I think, very soon. And if there's another $1 trillion bill, the idea that there's going to be additional funding coming out quickly, I think, is probably unlikely. Now, the congressional calendar is such that Congress, given the old schedule before the virus hit, Congress is going to be in session really pretty much through mid-July at this point. They're going to take a little bit of time off here and there. But at that point in time, they break for the Democratic convention. They're gone in August. They break for the Republican convention. They are in and out in September because of the Jewish holidays, and then they're gone in October to campaign. So the legislative calendar is shrinking very quickly, and getting an additional CARES Act bill for transit is going to be a challenge. Now, when it comes to the other legislative vehicles, are reauthorization of the FAST Act or an infrastructure bill. I think there's a growing consensus that there really isn't going to be an infrastructure bill this year. The virus is taking its toll. People are not getting back to work as quickly as I think a lot of people thought they would. And as a result, I think the focus is going to be on how long of a reauthorization bill and how much money can be in that for transit and for highways. The majority of the interest groups are pushing for a 5-year bill, and with a significant increase in funding. Peter DeFazio, the chairman on the House side, has proposed legislation as a part of the comprehensive infrastructure bill with about a 40% increase for transit. So that would be significant. The issue always is how are we going to pay for that? How will Congress come up with the revenue to cover that additional funding? In years gone by, they've scraped the bottom of the barrel and in between the cushions on the sofa to find the money. This year, because so much money is coming from the general fund, that certainly is a possibility. But I do want to warn you that there are some of the highway construction groups are beginning to realize that because a 5-year bill is going to be difficult, the Associated General Contractors, for example, are saying a 2-year reauthorization is fine as far as they're concerned. So, which is fine if the money comes in at a significantly higher level, but it doesn't give you the planning ability to plan for long-term projects. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Harry or try to answer any of your questions.
Hey, Steve, just one thing I would add to that, and Brad, I don't know, I know you're very active with APTA and with the Florida Transit Group. One thing I keep seeing when the speaker and some of the leadership talks about assistance to state and local governments is, they want to, I mean, as Steve said, the speakers talked about providing $1 trillion for states and local governments. But she also, in her comments, will always say we need to do this and to support public employees and transit. She'll sometimes say in the conversation transit. And I guess my concern would be, Brad, that APTA and some of the larger organizations that advocate for transit funding, that I'm afraid if you assume that money going to state and local governments is going to get to transit, that might be difficult because not all communities are set up the same way where you have separate transit authorities like yours. And so I did see a report this morning that APTA says they're preparing a request to Congress. And Brad, anything you can do, I think they need to speed that up because the Democrats are putting together their House proposal as we speak. And that could come out at any time, whether it's the end of this week or next week. And if they're just getting their request in now, they might be a little bit late. So I would advocate or urge them to get a request in, talk about the needs of all the transit agencies around this country, and not assume the money that's going to state and local governments is going to work its way down to transit agencies.
Well, that's certainly a good point, Harry. What I've heard so far through my various Zoom calls with the APTA folks is, I do know that their executive, Paul Skoutelis, the CEO of APTA, he testified before a House panel or some panel last week, and for what Steve was talking about, the proposal that I've heard is they're just sort of combining the authorization package, the proposal that has formulated for the reauthorization as a placeholder for what Transit's ask would be for a new infrastructure like CARES Act 3.0, that it's one and the same. So I don't know what you might have seen. I know that APTA has been pushing for obviously more funding, and it's in that reauthorization framework. Although Steve didn't give lots of exciting news just now about the potential for reauthorization. As far as PSTA goes, really funding for state DOTs is really sort of would be almost equally good as direct funding for transit, because what our biggest worry, at least short-term worry right now, is some of the information we're getting from FDOT. That the gas tax going down the tubes, and the state revenues going down. That the revenue that we receive from state and maybe even some of our local revenue is most in jeopardy. So if money could shore up the state DOT, that would probably be just as good. Just as a different way of getting transit money. So
Brad, I'm sorry to interrupt you. If I may, you probably are aware, and this may not be the right forum, but the trade association that represents the DOTs, the American Association of State and Transportation Officials, ASTA, does have a request for $50 billion that they have submitted to Congress. And one thing we could consider, if that's given what you just said about state DOT funding, is maybe expressing to the delegation support for the ASTA $50 billion request.
Yeah. Harry, I don't know if you have any input or intel on sort of like the Florida delegation where they.
Yeah, I think Mario Diaz-Balart would be a leader on that. The other thing I would add to that is, as part of this discussion about additional money for state and local governments, one of the issues that they're debating now is whether to allow for the future use of those dollars that they're providing to the governments for revenue foregone, lost revenue, whether it's sales tax, income tax, gas tax. I don't know if it includes gas tax or not. But to your point, Brad, if they would provide a large infusion of money, for instance, to the state, would the state, and they were given the authority to use that for lost revenue to the state, would they be able to help compensate for lost fuel sales tax revenue? I don't know if that would be something that could then filter its way down to you or not. So those are all things we need to keep an eye out on. And I know they're trying to provide maximum flexibility to the communities as best they can. So I guess, I don't know, I yield back to Steve on this because he's our expert, but I would not assume that anything that goes to state and local governments is going to wind up at transit. So I think anything APTA can do to keep the gas on. I mean, if there isn't, I know you've already gotten your CARES Act allocation, correct, Brad? You got that last month, I think, from the CARES Act bill, the money that came directly from FTA, the transit agency. So you have that, but I don't know how long that will carry you over.
Well, yeah, we're trying to figure that out. And just to sort of bring this back, so I think Chair Long knows this very well with our experience with T-BARTA, but as we're very grateful for the CARES Act funding that we did receive from Congress already. We haven't actually gotten the money in the bank yet. We have been allocated the money and we're putting together our application. But as you can all probably appreciate, it's very complicated in that we want to make, there's all these rules that you don't want to bill the same expense to two different grant sources. And we have a secret weapon named Debbie Leas, who has been amazingly doing that and fixing all of the T-BARTA funding and giving them a lot of help on not mixing and matching their different grants. And now she's going to do the same thing for PSTA with this CARES Act funding. So I feel really good about that. We will make good use of that. We've also applied for FEMA funds. We get different state grants and and other federal grants as well. So we're just trying to come up with a strategy on how to string out the revenue as long as it will go. But right now we're not collecting fares, and so that is a our revenue. And then just looking at sort of our state revenues, where we're hearing from this state DOT that those are in jeopardy. And then those are sort of our biggest short-term fears. But if there's any commissioners that have any questions for Harry or Steve about the federal funding, or if any of you have heard anything different than what we've been talking about, let us know.
Well, if I may just give a little input here, I didn't hear anything that was a direct response to my question about whether or not it might be wise or not to reach out to reach out to Jane Williams in light of all of the discussion that's just been had right here, to see from her perspective where she thinks the dollars that supposedly are supposed to come to us can be carved out before they start making any additional changes to mess it all up. I'm saying that very respectfully. I just, am worried that because the money that we are anticipating is not supposed to be coming from any future revenues, right, Brad? It's already there.
That's right. I mean, they have the money. Steve, I don't know. Do you have a thought on that, Steve? I mean, I would be in
No,
that again.
yeah, I think, first of all, on the funding, you're right. Brad's right. The money has been committed by Congress, and it's sitting waiting for FTA to allocate it and then obligate the funding for the project, as well as other projects. I mean, we're not the only one waiting for money. They've been, continue to be slow in pushing the money out the door. In terms of a phone call to Jane Williams, I certainly think that's worthwhile doing. But I'll add the caveat that I think the holdup is not at FTA anymore. It's more in the Secretary's office. And I'm not trying to point the finger at Elaine Chao, but they are, given my time at DOT many years ago, they are always trying to look to see can they maximize the announcement for something like this? How can they, do they want to push more money out for transit right now, given, where we are on the CARES Act? They're all looking at it from a much more political, high-profile perspective than they are has PSTA submitted all the documentation. I think the good news is, everyone has heard the same thing, that everything's in and the PSTA has done everything they can. It's now just in the black hole of the Secretary's office, and we have to find ways to push her to want to get that money out the door. I mean, as Mario Diaz-Balart's staff told Harry, the plan is that they plan on issuing the grant sometime this summer. So at least we're in the queue. It's just trying to get them to expedite it.
Okay, well, I'm going to say this as gently as I know how. While I have no interest at all in doing anything to make the president look good, politically, if that's what you're talking about, Steve, it's no secret that he's in the dumpster now in Florida, and this would be some level of positive thing for Tampa Bay. I'll just leave it there because I know I can get really snarky.
I had one other thought. Steve, I don't know if, or Steve, if you know if other cities, other delegations are doing the same thing we are. I assume they are, but there's probably, I think Abhishek identified maybe 5 or 6 other projects that are in sort of this black hole. Milwaukee, there's some out in California, and I didn't know if we could in some way join forces with some of them to put added pressure on DOT.
It's it's certainly worth considering. I mean, if the general managers, CEOs, and it may be worthwhile to make the initial contact at that level, and then we'd be happy to work with our lobbyists to try to craft a strategy that we can reach out to DOT and try to maximize, the multiple effect of different transit agencies.
Yeah, we have great Harry's connection with Mario Diaz-Balart, who's on the Appropriations Committee. Congressman Chris is on the Appropriations Committee, but I don't know
Here, scroll up.
the other ones are. They probably have top leaders too from their areas. Okay, well, I'll see who I can talk to and build a coalition.
Okay, and we're happy to help, obviously. I'm not trying to throw it back at you, but I think, many times lobbyists for transit agencies look at you when you ask them to join in the coalition, and first thing they do is go back to their client and say, what's this all about?
Right.
Yeah, if you could get the list of projects, Brad, that would be helpful. Then we could at least look them over, and we may already know who represents some of those transit agencies.
Yeah. Okay, so well, how about this? We hopefully I'll receive a response from Beth Day, who works at the Federal Transit Administration, who probably will likely not tell me anything helpful, but will maybe confirm what Steve indicated, that the decision is in the Secretary's office, and then we'll pursue this strategy of identifying other transit systems from around the country that are in the same shoes as we are, and see if there's any partnership with them that we can do to put pressure on the Secretary's office, and then maybe schedule a. We've had meetings. I know, Steve, Commissioner Long and I have had meetings in his office, governmental affairs staff and things like that. I don't know if reaching out to them is helpful, but maybe we try to do something like that in the next month. Try to get another phone call.
No, I think that's a great idea. I think any kind of pressure we can put on DOT at this point is worth doing.
Okay, so Commissioner Long, would you be willing to be on a phone call with the highest person we can get up to and including Elaine Chow?
Sure, and I promise I'll be nice.
Great. So we'll try to do that. Okay.
All right, is that it, Brad?
I think so. Thank you, Harry.
Okay. All right, so Ron, you're up next. Do you have an update on our legislative ask, and/or it looks like you want to talk about T-BARTA as well?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Just a couple of things. So session ended on March the 19th, which seems like ages ago, by the way, with everything that's going on. Let me talk about a couple of our priorities that we were able to work on during session. And once I do that, I'll turn it over to Alan, and Alan will kind of talk about, obviously, the economic impact that COVID's having on the state budget, and potentially kind of some forecast and what do we think may happen over the next couple of months in Tallahassee. So let me start with transportation disadvantage funding. And Brad, I'm not sure if you've actually got a spreadsheet to show your actual funding, what it may look like for next year. There's no proviso, which means it's probably following a very similar path as it did last year. What I can tell you is last year, as a part of the corridors bill, there was $10 million in transportation disadvantage dollars that were there, half of which basically was not used. And so what the state did, working with the Transportation Disadvantage Commission, is they took $5 million of those dollars, went back in and put it back into the formula to almost make every county that lost dollars last year as a part of the transportation disadvantage funds allocation, almost made them whole. So Pinellas County wasn't quite made whole, but it was pretty close. We expect them to follow a similar path this year, is what we're hearing. So hopefully it will be pretty much a net positive zero for us at the end of the day. The good news is there is still the Innovation Fund, which is very important for us for the late shift program. we've been working on. I think many of you have probably seen the press. Brad and Cassandra called us about a month and a half ago, wanting to see if we could take some of those innovation fund dollars from the late shift program and shift them over to an essential services program where, as we're basically during the day now giving rides to essential services workers that qualify for transportation disadvantage dollars. The Transportation Disadvantage Commission has approved that, and we're able to actually use dollars now from the late shift program on this new program, which is really good. We've actually got some positive press out of it. There's been a couple of different places we've got press on it. We have shared that with the entire delegation, not only in Pinellas County, but also the Bay Area legislative delegation as well as the congressional delegation. So they all know about it. During session at the very end, Brad Allen and I had a conversation with Secretary Mayhew about Medicaid transportation dollars. This is an ongoing issue. We're in many cases we're having to take on rides that they really should be done through through Medicaid, but they're coming to us because they can't get funding. They can't end up getting a ride through the Medicaid program, so we end up having to eat the cost of that. That's an ongoing discussion. I'm not sure if Brad has any comments there, but I can tell you, I think Secretary Mayhew's, interested in trying to find a solution and continue to work with us. So Brad, anything you wanted to add on the Medicaid transportation or on transportation disadvantage?
No, thank you, Ron. Yeah, and thank you and your team for helping us get the word out about this essential workers program and sort of reshifting while we had capacity to helping these folks who work at these. There's a number of businesses in Pinellas County that are really doing some great things for making ventilators and testing equipment and things like that. It's very, very positive. The good news on the Medicaid front is that the coronavirus, the stay-at-home, there's very, very few Medicaid, non-essential Medicaid trips happening. So the demand on our system has fallen off. So the issue that we were talking to Secretary Mayhew about was the fact that PSTA was transporting a lot of folks that at our expense, it really should have been transported using Medicaid funding. Medicaid trips have really fallen off the cliff during the pandemic. So that has not been an issue. Of course, the task force that Secretary Mayhew called she invited me to participate in was canceled at the end of March indefinitely. So I don't really have any. That's sort of been put on hold for now. But I think it was a good introduction that we had, and I'm sure that will continue in the future.
Yeah, Brad, we'll make sure we obviously continue that conversation when the time is right with Secretary Mayhew. So once we get over the next couple of months, we'll do that. Two other quick issues I want to mention before I turn it over to Alan. Number one is TBARDA funding. There's a couple of good news there. Number one is TBARDA did get transportation trust fund dollars again of 1.5 million for operating dollars, which is fantastic. I think even the better news is last week, Brad, Commissioner Long, and I were on a call with DOT. And as you all will recall, the last couple of years, when TBARDA's got those dollars, since it's non-recurring trust fund dollars out of the DOT trust fund, they basically have to take those dollars from other projects. Last year, they ended up taking almost $1 million from a PSTA project, which we weren't quite ready for anyway, so it wasn't a direct impact on us initially. But moving forward, as they have to take these funds, they have to take them from other transit-related projects. Based upon our call with DOT for next year, they believe they can take the $1.5 million out of a pot of money out of the central office, and it will not have an impact directly on PSTA or HART or other transit projects, which is really, really, really good news for us kind of moving forward. As a part of that discussion, and Commissioner Long has been driving this part of the conversation is TBARDA can't go back every year and look for non-recurring revenue and expect to be successful. And so PSTA is helping TBARDA in having conversations with DOT and others on trying to make sure that we find a recurring revenue source for TBARDA moving forward. And that's something we're going to be having in the off season. And the last part of the discussion with DOT was, as our BRT project, there are some segments of our BRT project that overlap with DOT and some of the improvements they've got during over the next couple of years. We had a call last week with DOT on trying to actually coordinate some of these improvements, and that way we don't have to disrupt traffic multiple times in same parts of the county. So I thought the conversation was a good place to start. There's some ways I think we could potentially be creative, and so I think that's an ongoing conversation that Brad, Cassandra, and the team are going to have with DOT. Potentially, maybe trying to do some coordination with DOT on some of these improvements starting in January of 2021. So there's no questions for me. I'll turn it over to Alan to kind of give you a quick update and kind of forecast of what to expect out of Tallahassee from a budget standpoint.
Yeah, thanks,
Alan?
Ron, and good morning, everybody. Big picture, Tallahassee, state budget. Many of you may have read the Orlando Sentinel article earlier this week about the state budget, the revenue projections coming in about $770 million short. While technically that is true, if you look at daily revenue receipts, that number is fairly accurate. There's a little bit of a gray area in how the state budget receipts are working during the current pandemic. The governor provided some extension, especially on corporate income tax. And so that we're not really having the hard deadline. So normally March receipts would be due by April 15th, April 20th at the latest. The governor granted, like I said, some extensions. So it's more of on a rolling basis right now. There's about $250 million that they know of that has not come in yet. That is actually March receipts that haven't arrived yet due to those extensions. So that number is at least the number could be around 500 million. But the governor's budget office, who Ron and I have been talking to a couple times a week at a minimum, getting these updates, projects it to be fairly far under 500 million, which they actually think when you look at our reserves, when you look at the federal money and what it may be able to use. Harry and I talked about this yesterday a little bit, what the CARES Act might be able to be used for in the future as far as filling some state gaps. And in addition to that, you have projections, you have money that came in prior to the pandemic. We were actually several tens of millions of dollars per month above projections. So there's actually a little bit of a cushion there already without even going into reserves. So when you kind of put all those factors together, I'm not saying it's all sunshine and roses, don't get me wrong, the budget is going to take a significant hit. But as far as the slash and burn that we saw in 08 and after 08 of the state budget, they don't currently believe right now, if the reopening and the phasing goes according to plan, and we don't have any second wave, so to speak, that's significant, they actually believe that things will be much better than they originally thought. So again, not all great news, but not bad news, and certainly not. And again, the Sentinel article was technically correct. There's no debating that. But I don't think they were looking at the full picture. And again, this is from the budget office at the governor, who's seeing these numbers every day as they come in, sales tax receipts and corporate income tax receipts. So on the budget itself, obviously July 1 is the budget year. The governor's office has repeatedly said that obviously they have plenty of time. If they sign the budget in early June to mid-June, there's still time to execute on what the state agencies will need to do. They don't see any rush. They want to make sure they have a full and accurate picture before they decide on the size of the veto list. We do continue to believe, Ron and I have talked about this, the veto list will still likely be significant because it will probably have to be, especially those general revenue projects that are included. But they're going to wait and look at that list. And again, all those factors that I just mentioned about CARES Act funding and other things are going to come into play when they decide their final number. So if they do it in late May, so think mid-May, May 15th to 20th, they'll start getting April receipts, which was kind of full, mostly full shutdown, probably our worst month. And then mid-June, they'll start to see, they'll start to see the May receipts come in. They'll have a better idea. I still believe as of last night that probably very late May, if not even first or second week of June, we'll see the governor act on the budget. And again, it'll be, there is no conversation in the governor's office right now about him rejecting the entire budget and calling the legislature back in for special session to completely redo the budget based on those numbers and receipts and reserves and everything else that they're seeing in play. If you think about it strategically, if the governor vetoes the entire budget and sends it back, there are a handful of things in there that he really, really cared about and worked very hard on. The starting salary for teachers, state worker pay raises, the environmental funding at a level that hasn't been seen in quite some time. He knows that if he sends the whole budget back, the legislature is going to trim some of those things just out of necessity in order to fund other things that they may see as priorities. So he doesn't want to lose the things that he's already won. He'd like to hold those, wait a little bit longer, maybe have a little bit of a larger veto list on projects and other programs. And then we do project a special session at some point because the legislature will have to appropriate some of those CARES dollars that are coming in. Some of them they won't. They go straight to the agencies for very specific reasons. But there certainly are some some funds that are going to need to be appropriated by the legislature. So we do think there will be a special session at some point to do that. No real projections when. The only other thing that's really on the agenda for a special session is a possible gaming compact with the Seminole Tribe. That's a significant amount of money to the state budget. So that could certainly be included in whatever conversations they have about a special session. I don't think a compact has not been reached yet. They're still kind of talking, but it certainly hasn't been a priority over the last several weeks, as you can imagine. But when they come back in special session, CARES Act funding definitely being appropriated, probably no policy issues, but then again, perhaps a gaming compact coming into play there. And those are really the things we see on the horizon. So again, happy to answer any questions, but that is kind of the big picture from a state budget perspective.
Well, that was pretty clear. Anyone have any questions or thoughts or comments, Commissioner Justice?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alan, and maybe you mentioned this and I blanked out for a minute, but I know that many House members, I think there was a Democratic caucus, was doing the letter to call for a special session and they were going to poll the members. Where is that in the process, or have we already passed that by?
Yeah, I think we've passed that by. I think if I remember correctly, I'd have to go back and check, but I don't think they got even close to the threshold to trigger the real, where the House actually takes the real vote. I don't even think they were close enough to the threshold to make it there. So
okay, yeah, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great question, Commissioner. Anyone else for the good of the order here, given all the information we've just received? Anybody?
Commissioner, I have a question.
Yes, Brad.
Thank you, Alan. And maybe you said this and I zoned out, but have you seen any revenue estimate on the gas tax or other DOT specific revenues?
We have not seen any projections. I asked that question on Tuesday night, and so I think everybody knows Chris Spencer is the governor's budget and policy director. Very, very familiar with Pinellas. He's from Pinellas County, from St. Pete. Used to work for Senator Brandes for many years. So he's the one who's in charge of. He is the spearhead for all of these budget issues, and so I asked him specifically that question, actually in preparation for this call, and he did not have it in front of him. He was going to go back to his transportation staff and ask for those numbers. So hopefully sometime this week, I may have some projections on that, and we can share them with you all, and you can share them with the rest of the boards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Brad and Alan. All right, so is there anything else, Ron, on the state legislative issues that we need to discuss today?
No, ma'am, we'll keep you updated.
I would like to just throw out there, for whatever it's worth, that you may remember last year, there were significant conversations going on within the Transportation and Appropriation Committees about carving out some additional dollars for innovation and new advances in technology as it relates to transportation and public transportation. And as we've gone through this just horrible experience with the COVID virus and the pandemic and how it is affecting not only us here in Florida, but throughout our nation and the globe, really. I guess I'm old enough to realize that out of adversity, there usually comes some enormous opportunities. And I'd like to think that as it relates to transportation, especially public transportation, we are going to be forced to rethink and take a look at how we provide those services for our citizens. And it may just turn out to be quite a blessing that we have not invested heavily in rail and heavy tracks, because some of the new and innovative things that have come across my radar, especially over this last year, lead me to believe that if there's an opportunity within the bowels of the process in Tallahassee to begin to have those discussions about how do we move the dial, how do we jumpstart the economy, and how do we kind of get a head start on the rest of our peers who may not be as futuristic and as progressive as PSTA has been in some of the work that we've been doing with innovation and technology. It might be a great opportunity for TBARDA to take advantage of studying some of those new things coming along that could help our whole entire region and our county and PSTA. So do you think there might be an appetite for that kind of conversation going forward? I know Senator Brandis loves to talk about all that new and innovative stuff.
Yeah, Commissioner, I'll take a first shot at that one, and Ron can certainly add to this. I can tell you that in a number of areas, number one, yes, just looking at the technologies themselves has certainly been discussed in Tallahassee. But something very interesting, near the end of session, we had a number of conversations with Senator Brandis, kind of leading the charge there, obviously, with Senator Simpson and Chair Sprouse, who were obviously coming into the Speaker President positions over the next 2 years, about trying to develop, coordinating with our regional authorities like TBARDA and our local authorities like PSTA, talking with them and having some conversations about what innovative infrastructure projects would look like. What can what is the state's role from a funding? I mean, obviously policy, we understand there's a role, but from a funding perspective, what is the role? And is the role possibly to come up with some sort of innovative infrastructure fund where some of these technologies might need a publicly shared specific type of infrastructure? If you're talking about eVTOLs, the landing pads that need charging infrastructure in a footprint of sorts, is that something the state could fund and publicly, obviously the public entity would own it, and it would be shared amongst all the vendors that provide that technology? That's just one example. I would say it was one or two conversations. I wouldn't say it went very deep, but I can say that it was very well received, and I think it was something of high interest in making sure, especially while we have those two leaders in those positions from the Tampa Bay area. I think that this group and the broader TBARDA group are going to be very involved in those conversations over the next 2 years. And I can tell you that it's something that this is Senator Brandis' last 2 years. He's not going to give up on those issues. I think he's going to have some legacy projects that he's going to ask for. And I think that is right in the wheelhouse. I think you're absolutely correct. I think you're spot on. I think those are things that we're going to be discussing in the very near future.
Well, as you know, the journey starts with the first step and the first conversation. So I'd be happy to try to weigh in on some of those with some of the ideas that I've been tooling around in the back of my head. And while it's been some time since I was in the legislature, in some ways it seems like just yesterday, but in other ways it's a lifetime ago. Wasn't there a thing called the Railroad Trust Fund or something like that?
There is, Ron, did they, I know they were gonna make some changes and pull some of that funding. I would have to go back and look at what happened, if anything. That bill may not have passed, but do you remember, Ron?
Yeah, it's the Rail Enterprise Fund, and in the DOT package this year, the funding is committed through like 2022 or 23, but there is opportunities after that. So I think it's something that we should definitely look at. And that's something that T-BARTA is definitely looking at from a potential funding opportunity.
Mhm.
Well, it's at one time, there was a substantial amount of money in there, correct?
Yes, ma'am, and a big portion of it, if you recall, is going to Sunrail. The Sunrail deal that was done a few years ago, and that commitment from the state, I think, expires if it's not next year or if it's 21 or 22. And then there's some additional dollars they've allocated for 22 and 23 that are out on the horizon. But there would be an opportunity in the 23-24 budget.
Okay, so with that said, I am really tired of hearing about all these deals that have been crafted for South Florida, the Jacksonville area. I mean, the list goes on. You can put Orlando in there in the mix as well. Don't you think that now is the time for for Tampa Bay to step up and get our share?
Yes, ma'am. And the good news is Alan's already pointed out with the two incoming presiding officers coming from Tampa Bay, now is our time. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I rest my case. Let's not waste one single moment. Before you know it, we're going to be having these conversations and they'll be on their way out. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. All right, is there any other business to come? Thank you, Gina, for laughing. Is there any other business to come before us, the staff, this morning? Anybody? No one? No? All right, seeing none, then we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Now, Julie, wasn't this easy peasy? Everybody wave bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everybody,
Bye.
good job. Thank you.
Good job, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was successful.
Always when I'm the chair.